Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at a game called Deception, Murder in Hong Kong from Grey Fox Games. Now this game was actually previously released as a game called CS Files with I think slightly worse components and not as nice artwork on the cover like this. Grey Fox kickstarted a new version of the game, and that is the one that I have here. Now what this is I would classify it as a party game in the same sense that you would call Mysterium a party game, and in fact there's a lot of similarities between the two games, but this is a little bit less involved as far as like being a board game. You and the other players are investigators, nominally, who are investigating a murder. One of you is a forensic scientist who knows the key piece of evidence, knows the means, the murder weapon, these things that are involved, and has... I don't know how to say this thematically, but mechanically speaking, the forensic scientist knows who the murderer is. You deal out these roll cards randomly. One of you is the forensic scientist, one of you is the murderer, the other players are the investigators. The forensic scientist knows all the information and is sort of the game master trying to help his teammates, the other players, guess who that murderer is based on the clues and means cards in front of all the different players. But you can't, as the forensic scientist, explicitly say these things. You have to give clues and hints, and that's where the whole deduction element and working together with a large group of people and suspicion and mistrust and resistance style party game fashion start coming out. So let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played. Then we're going to come back, let you know what I think. Okay, I'm going to give you a brief look at Deception, Murder in Hong Kong. This is a one versus all semi-cooperative deduction game. That's quite a mouthful, but one player is going to be a forensic scientist. They're sort of the game master for the entire scenario, although they are trying to win with the quote-unquote good guys. The good guys are the investigators, but amongst the investigators, there is one murderer. Your goal as the forensic scientist is to try to give clues without explicitly giving away too much to the investigators out on the table in order to point them towards the murderer and have them guess correctly. As the forensic scientist, you have perfect information. You know the clues, you know the means, and you know who the murderer is, but you can't actually come right out and say any of that. You need to give your own form of clues, and we're going to get to all of that. Now let's talk about the setup a little bit. Each player is going to get a set of cards, 4 clue cards and 4 means cards. The means cards are the ones that have the blue backgrounds, and they're usually objects that are presumably going to be used in a murder. You kind of have to use your imagination with some of this stuff. So you'll have 4 of those, and then you're going to have 4 of the clues cards, which are just things that were at the scene that may be pointing towards the murderer or towards the murder weapon and things like that. There's a lot of these different types of cards, and some of them are very mundane, some of them are very weird or specific. You have a whole stack of, as you notice, there's a lot more clue cards than there are means cards, but in any case, everyone's going to get a random allotment of these cards, except for the forensic scientist. You choose which order you want to do it in. The rulebook's a little ambivalent, like deal all the cards out first or deal the roll cards out first. But in any case, every player is going to get a set of these 4 cards, 4 and 4, and lay them out so that every other player can see them conveniently. Then you're going to set up your roll card deck. Now, in the roll card deck, for a standard game, you're going to have, this is a 4-player setup, by the way, the lowest player count. One player is going to be the forensic scientist, so you have to have one of those cards in your roll card allotment. Then you take 1 murderer card, and which is going to look like, which one did I make it? It is this one here. So that is the murderer card. So, and then there's going to be 2 investigator cards for this allotment. Or if you're playing with more players, you will fill out the rest of the ranks with more investigator cards. Or there are potentially a couple of other extra rolls. But we're going to get back to those near the end. So these cards are going to be selected, shuffled up, dealt out randomly. Everyone's going to look at their card in secret, and everyone except for the forensic scientist is going to keep their card secret and to themselves face down in front of them. The forensic scientist, however, immediately reveals their card, takes these 6 bullets, which are going to be markers to use for giving clues, and then the other players who are, whether they're investigators or murderers, obviously, the other players aren't going to know the difference. They're going to take these badges. These badges are going to be markers to determine whether or not an investigator has used their accusation for the game or not. And again, we'll get back to that. Oh, one other thing I want to point out just for the sake of thoroughness. You have scene tiles that are out here in the center of the table. Technically speaking, at the very least, these 4 tiles should not be out here yet. These are going to be randomized when the game gets into the investigation phase proper. I just put them out there right now for convenience sake because I wanted to selectively choose the ones I wanted to show you. But we'll get back to that. Now, once we have all this standard setup done, then the forensic scientist, who, like I said, is like the game master, is going to lead the players in a little ritual similar to the resistance. This is where the forensic scientist is going to ask all the players to close their eyes, and then when everyone's eyes are closed, ask only the murderer to open their eyes and then point at a clue card and a mean card in front of them. So whoever got the murderer card keeps the secret unto themselves, but during this phase is going to reveal themselves by opening their eyes to the forensic scientist and choose however they like, whatever method they want to choose to use. They choose a red card and a blue card. Those are the clue and the means that have been used in the murder that all the other players are trying to solve. So now only the murderer and the forensic scientist have that information. The forensic scientist is going to tell the murderer to close their eyes, make sure everyone else's eyes are still closed, and then have everyone open their eyes, and then you're going to begin the game. Now, there's a couple of the roll cards that we're going to get back to near the end of the overview that would require a couple of extra steps during this night phase, quote unquote. Alright, so now comes the investigation phase, and just to give you a reminder of what the game state is here, in this 4-player setup there are 2 investigators who are on the same team as the forensic scientist, and the forensic scientist knows the key piece of evidence and the means of murder, and knows who the murderer is even, but cannot just come right out and say that. So the investigation phase is all about using these scene tiles to give clues to those other players. The murderer, meanwhile, knows that the forensic scientist knows but isn't going to do anything about it. So the murderer is trying to throw suspicion off of him or herself and onto the other players so that to turn the, in this case, other investigator against the other one and sow doubt and mistrust. Now, obviously, in a game with more players, there's a lot more of that going on. You're trying to blend back into the crowd, not draw attention to yourself at all, and so on and so forth. Now, how the investigation phase is going to work, first and foremost, you're always going to have a cause of death tile out. It's always the same, and you have different types of death here: suffocation, severe injury, loss of blood, and so on and so forth. The forensic scientist is going to choose selectively one of the location tiles. So they're all just random stuff. So this one has vacation home, park, supermarket, school, woods, bank, etc. But he or she will physically get to take up the whole pile and choose the one that they want to use that they think is going to be most helpful in getting across the key means of the key piece of evidence and the clues or the means to the other players. Now, the other 4 scene cards are going to be at this time. This is why I was telling you that I just laid them out before for simplicity's sake. But at this time, they will be randomly placed out. You're going to have 4 of them. Now, and they're all just have different types of titles, and again are just a bunch of random words and phrases associated with that tile. So, corpse condition, still warm, stiff, decayed, state of the scene, bits and pieces, ashes, water stain, in progress, personality of the murderer, greedy, furious, and so on. They're just a bunch of different type of randomly interspersed clues together with the cause of death and the location of crime. So at this point, once these are all laid out, the forensic scientist is going to use the bullet markers that he or she has and start giving clues on each of the cards by placing one of the bullets on that tile, not card, that have something to do with the key piece of evidence and the means of murder, to try to get the other players on that person's team to take notice of those cards in particular. So let's say, for instance, the key piece of evidence was, let's say, violin and box cutter. Okay, there was a violin involved somehow, and the murder weapon was a box cutter. So I could look at the cause of death and say, let's see, for a box cutter, it's probably going to be loss of blood. So a loss by getting the throat cut or an artery cut or something like that. But it could theoretically be severe injury as well. That's where some of the nuance of the game comes into play. Once I put down my first bullet, I give a little bit of time for the other players to discuss, like, oh, why did they choose that? oh, that could mean this, or that could mean this and this. But you don't wait too long before putting down your next bullet. You just want to use the other player's comments to guide your next choice. So then you can say, well, okay, it was a musical instrument, so of these choices, let me focus in a bit. Sorry about that. So of these choices, it might be school, because, there's a music class at school, so a violin might be appropriate there. So then the players are going to look at everyone's cards and say, well, what could cause a large loss of blood? And what would you find in a school? And you'll start eliminating variables. Then I'd go to corpse condition and say, and again, some of these things might not be that applicable, but these are randomly put out. So then you might say it's intact, meaning that nothing was cut off. Then you might go to state of the scene and say, let's see, bits and pieces, ashes, water stains. Let's see. You might say it's maybe disorderly because there's blood everywhere. Or you might say it's tidy because it was a music room for someone who would play the violin. In progress might be entertainment because maybe it was in the middle of a musical performance. And then the murderer's personality. This could be a lot of different things, and all you have to work off of is a box cutter. So it could be forceful because they're using a rather savage and inarticulate weapon. Inarticulate is probably not the right word. Inelegant. But the end result is that you'll have all of these clues out here for the rest of the players to discuss. And now starting from, I think it's clockwise, from the forensic scientist, the forensic scientist is going to give each player a chance to, maybe about 30 seconds to a minute, to talk about these selections and what it could mean. Like say, okay, well, he chose this, this, and this, so I'm looking over at this person's cards and it could apply to this, and loss of blood could actually be a hook too, and all these different things. And the next player gets a chance to talk, and then the next player gets a chance to talk. Remember, no one knows who the murderer is, so the murderer gets to make their case too as to why someone else might, why you'd want to throw suspicion off of themselves. Once this is all done, then you get, once the forensic scientist declares that round is over, then you go to the next investigation phase. And you're going to do this 3 times. Now, the important thing to note here is that at any point, whether it's the first, second, or third investigation round, one of the players can make their accusation. They simply throw their chip in and say, I really think it's Nick. It's got to be at this point. And not only do you have to say that it's that person, you have to actually name the 2 cards. You have to say, well, I think it's a potted plant that could cause a lot of blood loss, and I think it was a magazine, for whatever the reason might be. Now, what the forensic scientist says at that point is very simply yes or no. It's very important that the forensic scientist doesn't give any kind of other hidden clues or intention or any kind of facial expressions or anything like that. You just say yes or no. That's it. Don't give any kind of indication that you've even chosen the right person. Once you've made your accusation, because you've turned in your badge and your gun, presumably, if it's anything like a movie, then that's it. You cannot make another accusation for the rest of the game. And in fact, you must make your accusation before the end of the 3rd investigative round. If you don't use your investigation attempt by then, it's gone. It's use it or lose it. Even the murderer might want to make an attempt, again, just to throw suspicion off of himself and make a good case for why he has chosen those things. The other important thing is that when you get to the 2nd and 3rd investigation rounds, you don't have to stay with the same allotment of stuff out here. In fact, that wouldn't really make any sense. What you do instead is take another random tile off the scene tile and replace one of the other tiles except for the cause and the location with the new one. So bystander might be, let's see. Oh, that's actually a good one. So I might get rid of bits and pieces because it wasn't really doing much for me anyways, and replace it with notice by bystander, and one of those is prolonged sound and sudden sound. So I might say prolonged sound, like a violin playing, like if he was killed in the middle of his concert, and the other tile is gotten rid of. Now, just to round up, I mean, that is essentially the game. That's going to happen 2 more times, a total of 3 times, and so you can do an evidence swap on the 2nd and 3rd times. If everyone uses their accusations unsuccessfully, or if no one makes a proper accusation or doesn't use their accusations by the end of the 3rd investigation, the murderer walks away scot-free. If someone was able to successfully guess the 2 cards before that case in front of someone, then everyone, including the forensic scientist who's not the murderer, will win the game. And that's essentially it. But let me tell you about a couple of little variant things. Not necessarily variants, but you use them in certain situations. First off, you have special scene tiles that are events. When one of these comes out, you'll do whatever the tile says, then discard it and replace it with another piece of evidence from the stack. So, for instance, you have ruled out. When this occurs, each player must flip over one of their own clue cards, removing it from consideration. This must be done without discussion. The murderer may not flip over the key evidence, so they can't flip over the important ones. Then you discard that tile. Or secret testimony. All players except the forensic scientist close their eyes. The witness then opens their eyes, points to a scene tile to eliminate, then closes their eyes. All players then open their eyes, and the forensic scientist discards the indicated tile and replaces it with a random one. We'll get to the witness in a moment. And so on and so forth. So these are just events that can add a bit of randomness to the game, but can also make it more interesting. You might want to do it for advanced players. Then finally, we have the 2 other role cards, the witness and the accomplice, which you're going to use when you have more players in the game. Basically, during the ritual where the forensic scientist is going to tell people to close their eyes and the murderer to reveal themselves, when the murderer opens up their eyes, the accomplice, whoever the accomplice is also going to open their eyes and know who the murderer is and what the key pieces of evidence and the means are. But that's it. So the accomplice's goal for the rest of the game is to throw suspicion onto himself, potentially, or the other players who aren't the murderer, and then hope that if he gets accused, that's a fail for the other players, but he can win with the murderer at the end if the murderer is not found out. The witness, however, is a good guy who can win with the rest of the good guys, and what happens during the night phase is that after the murderer and or the accomplice open their eyes and point at their cards, and then close their eyes, the forensic scientist tells the witness to open their eyes, and then the forensic scientist points at the murderer and the accomplice, and then tells everyone to close their eyes. So the witness knows who the bad guys are, but at the end of the game, if the bad guys can successfully guess who the witness is, even if they would normally win the game by getting away, the bad guys will win because they've killed the only witness. So the witness can't be too obvious with the information that he or she has. But that is essentially Deception, Murder in Hong Kong. Let's get to my final thoughts. Well, I never played the original game, CS Files. I know that from what I saw, it looked a little bit inferior as far as the components go. Deception looks nice. I like the artwork, even though a lot of the artwork is just mundane objects. It still looks good. The cover looks good, obviously. The quality of the components is good as far as like the card stock. The fact that they used thick cardboard tiles for the scenes instead of making them cards is good and user-friendly. If they were cards, even like Seven Wonder Styles cards, it would be a little bit tougher to people to see them. Everyone needs to be able to see them all at once and see where the forensic scientist is putting the bullets. So that works very well. I'm very happy with the component quality. And the theme of the game is strong, too. It's a little bit weird. Like, why would the forensic scientist know who the murderer is? And, I mean, what it's supposed to be thematically is he has a strong suspicion and has to get the other investigators and detectives to come around to his way of thinking. But, you know, it's still a little bit weird. But it works well. It's fun to kind of come up with stories as to how the murder actually happened and why the 2 objects involved matter. Like, just in the overview I did, like, like it could be a magazine and a potted plant. It's like, and you know, is this a crime of passion, a sudden thing? Was it an accident? And so, I mean, it doesn't have to be a murderer, technically. You can just say, oh, this person's guilty of manslaughter. We're just calling him a murderer, that type of thing. You can come up with little stories. I think that you can have a lot of fun doing it like that. And the more that you do that, I think it makes it a little bit easier for the murderer in the game, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because now you're all coming up with stories, and it's not all about hard evidence anymore, and it's easier for the murderer to sort of get suspicion off of himself by making up a good story that sounds plausible, that kind of thing, and just having fun with it. Mechanically speaking, I think that, as I mentioned, this is a mixture of some elements of Mysterium, in the sense of one person who can't really say anything, trying to give clues to the other players in his minimalistic way. Now it's like, instead of using artwork cards like Dixit, you're using very vague clues on some cards which are totally random to you, trying to make the most of it, which is restrictive in its own right. And it's cool how you have to deal with that on the fly tactically and try to make the most of it to get the clues across to the players And just like in Mysterium, getting really frustrated when they rabbit trail off to some other total place. It's got elements of the Resistance, obviously. Some things are just like the Resistance. Like in the base game, it's just like there's a murderer and there's investigators. But then you have the whole system with the accomplice and with the witness, and that feels and how the witness can be guessed at the end if the murderer and the accomplice would otherwise lose, which feels very much like Resistance Avalon and how that system worked with Merlin and such. But that's not bad. I mean, that's a good thing to have, and I think it works well in this game when you have enough players for that. I think the game actually plays well. I've played it with 4 players, and I've played it with 7 players. And, no, I'm sorry, maybe it was 6. It was 6 or 7 the first time that I played it. And I think it works well at those counts. I think that with less players, you don't want to bother. I don't even know that you can bother with the witness and the accomplice. No, you wouldn't with a 4-player game, at least. But with more players, even if you didn't have to, I'd still recommend using those 2 because I think it's pretty interesting and adds a bit to the game. I also recommend the events. They are random. They add some randomness to the game for sure. But I think this game needs it at a certain point. If I was going to say what the biggest fault of the game is, it's that sometimes there's just not that kind of excitement that you have from other games of this genre. Even with Mysterium, where there's like that tension, like, is this the right one? Did I do it right? And am I picking the right choice? Or we're running out of time, and like the Resistance is like constantly arguing back and forth, which has its own problems, but it's still pretty exciting. I think that Deception can sometimes just feel like there's, meandering, talking, and, you have to be very sure about how much time you want to give to each person to do their discussion, because then it could really drag on. And that would be the biggest problem I have with the game. It's not a deal breaker for me, but it's something that I noticed. I also think that as far as the balance goes, I've played the game probably with each group because it is so quick. That's a benefit of the game. It's very quick. So I've probably played it like 8-9 times at this point, but still not enough, I think, to really say, okay, this is super balanced in one way or the other, murderer or the investigators. But I do think that it is super critical that the murderer chooses his objects wisely, which can be tough to do. But if you choose objects that are going to be an easy layup for the forensic scientist to give clues for, then it's really going to cripple you. You can be found out like right away. That's happened in some games we've played where people are just like, the investigator just happens to get the right allotment of cards, which is random, but also he has the ability to choose a location tile at least. And it's just like, and everyone's just like, oh, first investigation round. It's probably that. I mean, there's no incentive for you to give your accusations too early, so you can play it out and wait all 3 rounds, which is another thing that's kind of anticlimactic about the game. But still, it can usually come back around to just saying, yeah, we suspected you all along, I'm just going to say it, and they're usually right in that type of scenario, because you can just get screwed and have the perfect clues come out for the investigators. Whereas if you choose, it's kind of an art form, but if you were to choose items that are just like completely disparate things, that have really weird things, and hopefully just get lucky, you might have a ton of cover, in which case it's really easy for the murderer to throw suspicion off. I do think that this game requires much more of an active personality, or a social personality, especially if you are the murderer, to be able to come up with stories and to lie a lot and really get suspicion off of yourself. So I would say that that's a problem for people who aren't like that, who just kind of want to fade into the background and want their social deduction games like Mysterium to be more passive. This is much more active in that regard, but I don't think it's overly much. I think it works pretty well for that regard. So I like it a lot. I think it's great. I think that if as long as you can manage the time and not let people blabber on too much as the forensic scientist. The forensic scientist needs to be like a dungeon master and keep that thing running smoothly. And as long as you're okay with just some games just being randomly thrown to one side or the other, I think it's a solid game. It plays very quickly. It's very easy to set up, very easy to teach, and it looks good, and the theme is strong. So that is Deception, Murder in Hong Kong. I recommend it. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.